All right. Good morning, or at least good morning to our live audience, and good afternoon to our distinguished guest today, joining 8 hours ahead. And welcome to the Palliative Care Friday Chalk Talks. Today we have a fascinating psychological slate of palliative care topics that range from terror management theory to gallows humor to how we cope with mortality salience. And all of that stems from today's paper, or at least the paper and my intrigue to go down the rabbit hole from the paper. And so today we have a paper called Out of the Depths Have I Called Thee? Jewish Israeli Undertakers' Management of Death Anxiety. It is out of the Journal of Death and Dying. And our fabulous guest today is the author of that paper. She's the head of the MSW program at the School of Social Work at Ariel University, Israel. She's an expert and a scholar in the field of trauma, and I have been so excited waiting for today to welcome Dr. Michal Mahat Shamir. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Our format for today is going to be 2 parts. So we've agreed on 5 or 6 topics we're going to discuss, or at least as many as we can get to in about 20 minutes. And then second, we'll open it up to the audience for any questions that people have. So can I just jump right into the first question?
Sure.
All right. So for most of us in palliative care, this conversation right here is perhaps the first time we've ever heard of terror management theory. So can you share a little bit with us about what is terror management theory?
Yeah. Well, this is one of the most influential theories in like the field of like psychology, and it was first theorized as to understand why people have prejudice. But then we actually, not me, the authors of that theory, they thought about that people don't hate each other; they're just threatened by each other. And why are they threatened? Well, because us as individuals, as human beings, we have the capacity to know and reflect on our own mortality. We know that we are all going to die. And this is a major threat on human beings. Like, we don't want to think about us going to die. So what do we do in order not to think about it? We need to have what we call buffer mechanisms, okay, to protect us from that terror or that knowledge. So this is the theory, and it says that we have like 3 buffer mechanisms that protect us. One is our cultural worldviews. Like, we have our worldviews and we feel like there's something bigger than me, something that is much more important or much more meaningful than my own physical self. It may be a religious cultural point of view, and it can be a secular one, doesn't matter. But as long as we have it, I feel like it's not just me and I'm going to die, but there's something bigger than me. The second mechanism is self-esteem. It's not just that I have these cultural worldviews, but I meet these worldviews or these values. Okay, I'm a good person, or I meet the values of my society, so something's gonna remain after I'm gone. It may be heaven, like symbolic ideas, like I'm gonna live, I'm a good person, so my soul gonna be in heaven. But it may also be my children or my achievements all gonna stay after I'm gone, and I'm not gonna be completely dead. And the last one is close relationships. like attachment. When I'm attached to someone, I feel like something is also bigger than me. I'm protected, and also that after I'm gone, someone's going to remember me, maybe immortalize me. So these all mechanisms that we use unconsciously, of course, to protect us from uh, our own thoughts of mortality. But sometimes when death is salient, it's hard for us to use these mechanisms, or we need to use them much more. And this is mortality salience. So, what happens to people like yourselves that meet death constantly, massively? How do you manage the mortality salience effect? How do you buffer against being just terrorized all the time? Or don't you?
Yeah. And thank you, even though I know I've already said it. I can't believe I had not heard of this theory beforehand. And this is such a great opportunity for us to uncover some of this and learn more about ourselves. So our second question focuses on that first part, the worldview. So in a world, or even in a little microcosm like our hospital culture, we're surrounded by diversity and the other and different. And so what sort of advice can you offer us about how we can use this worldview for good to cope with death salience without pushing away all those who are different from us?
Yeah, I was actually, because you gave me heads up on the questions, I was looking through what can I say to you, because we live in such a mean world, all of us, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it seems like everybody hates everyone. You know, I live in Israel, so I know that. But I recently, not so recently, wrote a paper with a colleague of mine, a German colleague of mine, and we found out it was a quantitative research. So we found out how xenophobia actually backfires at one.
Mm,
Like, it's not good for you to hate others.
mm,
It's not good for your well-being. It's not good for your psychological well-being. So I guess maybe it's all about education, how we can educate ourselves and others to have a beneficial worldviews, like to believe in kindness, in
mm,
the value of life, about how we are all equal, and but
mm,
actually we need to look at the worldviews as something that may be dangerous, because when people hold dangerous worldviews, and they believe to be better or uh, superior than others. So this is maybe it can give us a hint of why people, why genocide happens or things like that. And we should try to maintain positive worldviews.
sure. Like a sense of mutual humanity rather than my fraction of humanity is better than your fraction of humanity.
Yeah, and actually, when we talk about death and dying,
Mm.
we are all the same, aren't we? Like, we're all going to die at the end, and we all, I guess, look kind of the same from the inside. That's for you to say as a physician, but so who cares?
Uh, my so my third question came after I remember reading Undertaker Adams' quote, and he said, "Even though people find it hard to fully understand what we're doing and why, especially why, they usually respect us and the work we do. You see, everyone needs us eventually, and everybody knows that." And
Yeah,
so, I mean, I think everybody here in the audience, everybody in palliative care can share a story about people asking us, why do you do that for a living? And sometimes they recoil, sometimes they're shocked, sometimes they say, how, that must be hard. And the question for you, being an expert in the field of trauma, trauma like death is pretty taboo too. And I assume you also have experience with this recoil. How do you respond to people like that? What sort of advice do you have for us?
Well, actually, I'm not in the field of trauma. I'm in the field of traumatic loss.
Mm,
Bereavement
mm,
is my field,
mm.
so I'm much closer than you think. Yeah, people recoil, and people. I'm not even a physician, that I don't have the glamour of being a physician. I'm just a social worker, so that's even more horrifying. But I told you about this paper I wrote with
Mm.
a colleague of mine. We were at a conference, and it was a trauma conference, and we were talking. We had a talk about traumatic loss, and by traumatic loss, we were talking about mothers who lost a child to homicide, sons who lost their mothers to suicide, and so on. And the audience contained 8 individuals, all were friends of ours, and even they didn't want to come. I mean, they were forced to, and nobody came, and it was surprising to me. But looking at the audience, my colleague said to me, "You see, because we have this phrase. It's not ours. Dawker mentioned the phrase disenfranchised loss. When a person is disenfranchised due to the loss he experienced. So sometimes, and she looked at the audience and she said, this is disenfranchisement. So we wrote a paper about that, and we called it Empty Chairs at Empty Tables, like the song from Miserable, La Miserable. So yeah, so we said that we sometimes are disenfranchised by association. And I guess we need to know that people, we sometimes create mortality salience within others. Like people look at us and we are reminders of their own mortality. They don't want to think about that. They don't want to see us. So we need to be patient, and we need sometimes to educate people and to tell them that's okay. You're going to end there eventually. I do that with my students whenever I go to class and we work about,
Mm.
some bereavement topic. I start the class by saying, do we all know that we are about to die at the end? And they look at me as if like they don't want to hear that. But then I ask them to open a WhatsApp group and to give it a funny name containing the word death. So we make fun of it, and we became like we're friendly with the topic of dying and death, and it becomes easier.
What a perfect segue, because because the next question is kind of about that gallows humor. So again, when I read your paper, I thought of our work colleagues and our team rounds every morning, and we cope with a lot of dark humor. And in your paper, they call it Undertaker humor. Other people call it gallows humor. And the paper specifically talked about the high employee turnover because of the mortality salience and how humor helped. And here's the quote that I want to read that I really like. We're all affected by this line of work, maybe even damaged by it. So we laugh together and we don't feel so alone facing all that. Humor is a way to unload that emotional burden. Ah,
Yeah.
so beautiful. And 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 even though we use some dark humor, I think sometimes we feel some guilt in doing so. And maybe maybe we shouldn't, but can you offer us some wisdom about using dark humor, or maybe we shouldn't feel so darn guilty about what we're doing?
Maybe it's best for us all to know that even Freud and other scholars after Freud uh, found humor to be one of the most important things individuals can have in life. It helps us cope with lots of anxieties, not just death anxiety, right? Whenever we're anxious, humor is like the best medicine for us. So we shouldn't feel guilty, just as we don't feel guilty using aspirin, right? We can take that and use it. And also, I think I sent you this paper we wrote about times of COVID when we termed the paper When Times Get Tough, the Toughs Get Funny.
Yeah.
And you can see that whenever times get tough, suddenly all the network is filled with funny memes and jokes about the situation because it helps us cope. So we shouldn't feel guilty. It's important.
Yeah. Oftentimes when studies get published, there are other fun things that people find, but they just don't make it into the paper. So is there something that you did discover that just didn't make it into the paper that you think you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, there were two things. The first is uh, the most, not most, but some of the undertakers mentioned going to sleep as a coping mechanism, and I found that intriguing. Actually, I looked it up, and nobody talked about it previously. Uh, there are no papers who mention sleep as a coping mechanism. Sleep is always mentioned as a disorder, like we find it hard to sleep whenever we're troubled. But it was very intriguing to me to find out that people sometimes choose to sleep in order to avoid um,
Yeah.
complex situations.
Yeah.
And now I'm trying to examine that sleep as an escapism. And the other thing is that they were talking about rituals they do whenever they leave their place of work and they have to go home. And actually, I was talking to social workers working in palliative care, and they also talked about rituals they have. Now, it can be small rituals, and it may be big ones, like one told me how she takes all of her clothes in front of her home and hoses herself so she won't bring death into the house. And others just said, like, I have this word I'm saying. Uh, one said to me today, she says, God forbids, whenever she leaves the hospital. God forbids.
Hmm.
So that's interesting to me. And actually, a paper about that is about uh, to be published soon, I hope.
Probably.
Yeah.
Your background and everything that you do, grief, loss, it tremendous overlap with palliative care. And I'm sure we could sit here and talk all day and learn from you, but we cannot do that. So our last question before we open it up to the audience is picking something, anything, something that's passionate to you that you think is important that you would want to share with us.
As I told you before, I'm into traumatic loss, but I really am interested in the disenfranchised loss. or disenfranchised mourners. And I think that as people who work in palliative care, sometimes you meet, well, they're not mourners yet, but they're about to be, okay, family members that are disenfranchised. Like, you acknowledge the mother, you acknowledge the father, siblings, maybe children, but what about this nurse or I don't know if you have these in the States, that sometimes, mostly there are foreign workers who work with an elder person and takes care of him.
Yeah, we
And
have like
sometimes,
paid care workers of sorts. Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes they can live with the person for years and years.
Mm,
But once the person is dead or even dying, nobody talks to them.
mm,
They're not part of the family.
mm,
They're being ignored.
mm,
So if there's something I would love for you to do is to acknowledge these people, to acknowledge the people surrounding the patient
mm.
who are not immediate family members, who are not like obviously are affected by his death, but sometimes close friends or neighbors, and of course, a person who takes care of the person for a long time, and yourselves.
Mm.
Yeah, you can mourn a person also, right? I bet every one of you has a patient he remembers or she remembers who touched their lives. So maybe acknowledge each other.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Let's open it up to see if the audience has any questions. I think we will have Tom go first, then Steve, and then we'll see how many others we have as well.
Good morning, and thank you for presenting, Dr. Mahat Samir. My question is, how does the model that you just described, and I appreciate the letters that have been shared, but how does this model relate to the next of kin that experience complex grief following death? So it is the person dying and they're gone. Does the model have any implications for the survivors and for the survivors that don't have a normal recovery?
I don't really use the terms normal or unnormal recovery. I'm more now, I'm influenced by the work of Robert Niemeyer. You should read him. He talks about finding meaning in loss. So recovery is a process which actually never ends. But I guess that when a person is hospitalized and is dying, their next of kins, they are experiencing mortality salience because they are surrounded by death. And a close family member dies and he is hospitalized with other dying patients. So when you walk around the hospital, you are near death. So I guess one may experience mortality salience. So I don't know if it helps you cope because it makes you ready for the death. And maybe we should talk to next of kins about dying and what's going to happen. But meaning in loss is a process that never ends. So, and we all gonna lose someone at the end. We're not just all gonna die. We're all gonna lose someone.
Yeah. Steve, I see you've got a question.
Hi, yes. So I was recently involved in the care of a patient who died from complications of COVID. And what was striking to me was after the death, the funeral home called and said that the family requested that COVID not be listed on the death certificate as the cause of death because they didn't believe in it. So the question I have is, how do you help a family through bereavement and coping and understanding when their worldview is so at odds with the medical view, and my attempts would risk destroying their worldview?
First of all, I don't think you can destroy anyone's worldview. You're not going to persuade them in any way. But I'm trying, like when I work with bereaved individuals and they have different worldviews than mine, it's like usually people don't want suicide be written on the death certificate, because suicide is something that is highly stigmatized, right? And I can say to people, you know, whatever is listed, it's listed because this is what the state wants, or it's like my obligation to write something medical. But you can read that and say, he died out of bullshit. Don't like ignore that. What do you care if people read COVID and believe in it or not? What's important is what they believe in and how can they work through grief. So who cares? I mean, medicine is for you, it's not for them. Let them believe in whatever. You know, sometimes I see religious, and like my undertakers say, they are ultra-Orthodox Jews. Now, I'm secular as hell. And they say, well, people say this is nonsense, or I'm an ignorant fool. I don't care. I do my thing. And I advise you to take their advice. They don't care. You can look at them as ignorant fools, but they do the job, so.
All right, one last question, Roberto, and then we will conclude for the day.
I don't know if you would let me go because it's not a question. I just want to make a comment about
Please.
dark humor. I found it interesting because, yeah, I am a chaplain, and 2 days ago we have in the Christian world anyway, in the Catholic world actually, Ash Wednesday, and one of the things we say when we impose ashes, we say, "From dust you came, and to dust you shall return." Which is is connected because it's death, you know, and it's a reminder about death, you know. And so with Mari, I have this dark humor. I say, you know, well, Mari says that it is kind of that's a weird, that's a weird thing. He said, well, I can use one with you and maybe you like it. What about if I say to you, remember that you are dirt and you shall be recycled? Which is true, you know. I mean, so I think it is part of that humor that sometimes we don't like to talk about death. And yet, you know, I know that I'm going to die. And because I am his elder, I probably will die before Mari. And so it's no way around it. So thank you.
You can never know. You can never know.
All right, we will conclude. It was an honor having you with us today. Thank you for sharing everything that you did.
It was my pleasure, actually. I was really excited to meet you all, because I feel like rarely I can meet people who deal with death like I do and are not recoiled by me. So it's a pleasure. It is.
All right. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.